What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 85 of the Book Binge. This week is going to be a little bit of a different type of thing because this one's not a normal episode. This time, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a discussion video with Jonathan from Words in Time. If you don't know Jonathan, you can check out his channel linked in the description and probably also the title of this video. Jonathan does a lot of sci-fi related content, and that is actually the purpose of today's video as well, which I'll get into in just a second. I heavily recommend Jonathan's channel. He's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, booktubers at this point, and especially when it comes to sci-fi, he's the best there is on the platform. So I highly recommend go checking him out. For this video, I'm going to be having a discussion with him because a couple months back, I did do essentially a full series review of The Sun Eater, or at least however much of the full series is out so far, talking about a lot of the things that I loved about that series and then kind of asking for recommendations of sci-fi stuff that I might enjoy because of what I enjoyed in The Sun Eater. And Jonathan and I set up a time to be able to talk about this so that he could recommend me some sci-fi stuff because I have pretty much no knowledge of the genre, like relatively speaking. I don't really know much, so I hope you enjoy this video and what we're going to talk about. But either way, let's go ahead and jump right into my discussion with Jonathan. Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Not Words in Time. I am not Jonathan, but Jonathan did graciously accept my invitation to appear on the channel. Say hello, Jonathan.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Casey, I'm excited to be here. Always look forward to talking about sci-fi, especially trying to make a sci-fi convert, because I know you've kind of dabbled in it, and I want to kind of help you bring you over to Team Sci-Fi a little bit with a few recommendations.
Yeah, I've dabbled just a little bit. I mean, I love Sun Eater, as anybody who's been on my channel for even just a few months knows at this point. You can
Love it.
barely see on the recording. Jonathan can see my Sun Eater shelf here, and then I just have Dune, the first half of it up there with the deluxe editions. Other than that, I have next to no sci-fi in my collection, let alone anything that I've actually read. So that, you know, I'm not very well versed, but the purpose of this discussion was I invited Jonathan onto the channel so that he could recommend me some stuff, because if you have not checked out Words in Time on YouTube before, absolutely do so. I'll probably have you tagged in the title of the video as well as the description, so anybody
Appreciate
watching
you.
can check you out, because Words in Time is you're easily one of my favorite booktubers as of this moment, and absolutely the best that covers sci-fi, because most booktube covers fantasy primarily. So
Yes, we got to take down the fantasy booktubers. Look, guys, I love fantasy, and I love all my fantasy booktube friends. But yeah, the sci-fi community, we're too small. We need to kind of pick up our weight, and hopefully I can contribute a little bit today by getting you to include a little bit of sci-fi on your channel.
yes, as we say, as everything behind me in frame is fantasy.
Yeah.
But with that being said, Jonathan has told me that he has picked out 5 space operas specifically for recommendations for me, because that's, you know, that's what Sun Eater is, and I'm also a fan of Star Wars, always have been, just since I was a little kid. That's very space opera-y, and both of those are a little bit more on the fantasy-esque side of things than, say, Three Body Problem would be. But
hmm
what is the first recommendation you have for me?
Okay, so the first space opera recommendation that I have for you, knowing that you're a fan of Sun Eater, I think this one might hit for you. And I think it's a little bit underrated. I feel like more people need to check it out. It is Deathstalker by Simon R. Green. So Deathstalker has a little bit of a fantasy in space type feel to it. We follow a character named Owen Deathstalker, who is part of the powerful Deathstalker clan, but he doesn't want anything to do with politics and power. He just wants to read books in his library. But he gets sort of a hit put out on his head. The Empress tries to banish him, and so he has to flee. And he kind of forms this kind of like ragtag team of outcasts with people chasing them, and they decide to try and take on the powers that be and take down the throne. So it has wonderful politics. So you've got your typical powerful houses, your noble houses, and it's sword and planet. So we've got our laser guns, but we also have a lot of sword fights. You get some great one-on-one duels. The dialogue is hilarious. It's very sharp. It's very witty. It's very character-based sci-fi.
Okay.
So if you like that, I think you're going to enjoy Deathstalker. I think there's a lot of crossovers between it and Sun Eater, but whereas Sun Eater dives into a lot of heavy literary references, a lot of heavy
For
themes,
sure.
it can be amusing at times, but it's a fairly heavy series.
Yeah, for sure.
Deathstalker kind of leans more being into tongue in cheek. It has a lot of fun. It throws a ton of ideas at the dartboard. Most of them stick, not all of them do, but you have a great time along the way, and you get a lot of funny characters. You can kind of tell the tone of the show based on the character names like Owen Deathstalker and Valentine Wolf. It's just a barrel of fun. I think you're gonna like this one, Casey.
Okay. This is one that I actually did. Because you did an individual review of this several months back, didn't you?
I did. I got very excited when I read the first Deathstalker book. Gave it a dedicated review, a dying art form on BookTube.
Something
But I
that I
thought it
am
was
not willing to kill off. But no, I
I
did
love it.
watch that review, and I can't remember if I commented on that or an earlier video you did before that where you had mentioned it, and I was like, this seems like something I might be interested in giving a shot, even though it's not one that's like easily recommendable for certain reasons. But so that's one
Yeah,
that
it's
I'm
if
interested in.
you like if you like something that just really goes for it, and if you like a sort of like a few weird horror elements and stuff, there's some like undead soldiers that need like other people's blood to survive and stuff like that. So if you like a little bit of gore, if
Classic.
you like a little bit of slapstick, yeah, I think it might hit for you.
Alrighty, that sounds good. I'm actually gonna go ahead and put in my notes the series slash books that you recommend here so that I can refer to them later. Sorry, I had to take care of some audio issues. So, what is the second series that you have for me, Jonathan?
All right, the second series that I think you might enjoy as a fan of Sun Eater, and I think you've heard of this one. It is Ilium by Dan Simmons. So
Ah, okay. Ilium and Olympus.
here we go. Yes, it's a duology, Ilium and Olympus, and Hyperion, much loved on YouTube, deservedly so. One of my all-time favorite series, and I might actually slightly prefer it to Ilium and Olympus. But Ilium and Olympus still deserves recognition. It's a very good duology, and I think it's one that you will enjoy because of the historical references, the literary references, the mythology that is included. So this is, in a way, sort of an alternate retelling or take on the Iliad and the Odyssey, where the Trojan War is happening on Mars, and there are gods and robots and aliens, and some of these are Moraveks, they are called, coming from outer space to this war. They are obsessed with Shakespeare and Proust, and it's there. There's very
Okay.
few books that I have seen throw so many ideas, so many concepts into the one story, and I'm not sure if Dan Simmons quite pulls all of it together. I think Olympus kind of it's a little bit wobbly at times, but I think it's totally worth reading the duology just for so many cool moments, so many cool ideas that kind of involve some sort of historical fiction combined with some harder science, as well as some interesting characters. I'm not sure the characters are quite as strong as in the Hyperion Cantos, but Achilles, just absolutely one of the coolest storylines following Achilles. I think anyone that's interested in those historical tales, putting into a kind of a sci-fantasy setting, I think you'll have an absolute blast with it. So
Well, that sounds
hopefully
really
this one lands for
interesting
you, Casey.
because, well, one of the things that made me fall in love with reading, let's say back in middle school, was reading Rick Riordan, which I actually have on my shelf down there below. And he does a lot of
Nice.
mythological related stories, though they're set in a modern timeline. And I've always been obsessed with, let's say, ancient cultures, history, and mythology are some of my favorite things to just like learn about for no reason at all. And I actually read Iliad and Odyssey late last year in September and October, I believe. Have you actually read either of those?
I have not, but I'll probably be the flip side of you. Reading Ilium and Olympus made me want to read the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Well, I actually really recommend those. I did do reviews of both of them late last year as well, that some people watching this video may know, because Iliad is really shocked me with just how good it is. There's a little bit of like repetition throughout, but that's just kind of part of the format and structure of ancient, you know, plays because they were performed, they were sung, so the repetition helped for memorization. But yeah, the fact that uh, I gifted you the first one of these books, and now you're recommending it to me is really ironic. And the reason I
It was
gifted
it was,
to you was
it
because
was a
of
good
the
gift. I had
references.
to gift a recommendation right back to you.
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, it's one of those I was like, I kind of recommended it or I gifted it to you because I was like, okay, well, this seems like something that I might eventually want to read someday. I'm sure Jonathan will read it if I gift it to him. So that absolutely works for me. Because that was kind of already on my list as well. It might even be on my wish list if I'm remembering correctly, those two books. So I will definitely be looking into those more so now.
And as a fan of Sunny, it'll be interesting to see if you see any inspirations or things there. There's a couple of questions I have for Mr. Rocchio about what might have inspired him from that duology.
Interesting. I might have to try talking to him at some point
Yeah.
because I know I was depending on when his baby is actually born, because apparently they've had a couple instances of going to the hospital and apparently it wasn't ready yet. Um but depending on all of that, maybe in June or July I might be able to actually have him on the channel, so that'll be exciting. Um but
Awesome.
with that being said, what is your third recommendation?
Okay, so this one is a little bit less off the beaten path. It's
Okay.
on the beaten path. This is a familiar one, but I think it is one that appeals to a lot of fantasy readers for a reason, and that is The Expanse by James
Okay.
S. A. Corey.
One that I
So I feel
have
like this is
heard
a good
much
one.
about.
Yeah, I feel like this is a good series to recommend for people that are newer to sci-fi. They are quite fun and fast-paced, all of the books. They adhere somewhat strictly to various scientific ideas. So sometimes people describe them as hard science, but I think the amount of science, the amount of technical descriptions and things is very minimal. They always manage to keep the story moving forward, and it's very character-based. So if you are used to longer fantasy series where you get attached to certain characters over longer story arcs, I think you'll find that rewarding in The Expanse. For me, overall, I'd say I would personally give it 4 stars as a series as a whole. All of
Acceptable.
them are decent, but some of them are great. There's a handful which I think hit some really high heights and make the series worth reading as a whole. I have recently finished all 9 books, and the series is kind of somewhat split into 3 sub-series. There's 3 sub trilogies that kind of tie off their own stories, and then we have something that kind of ties all 9 books together. However, don't be too intimidated because I feel like book 1 is a relatively satisfying read on its own. So if you're like, Jonathan, I don't know if I want to get into a 9 book series, I think you can read book 1, and if you don't like it, hey, tap out. If you like it, but you're like, I think I just got enough out of it, it's a satisfying point to take a little break. And if you love it, hey, then you got 8 more books to read.
That sounds perfect. I mean, I'm not inherently intimidated by large series by the fact that you might see a missing book up there, if I could point the right direction, because I
Yeah.
started Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, which isn't as long as The Expanse, but it's big. And I also recently started Wheel of Time, which is actually really big.
Yeah.
So that part doesn't scare me, luckily. But when you ranked the 9 books, wasn't number 8 your favorite, if I remembering correctly, in The
Yes,
Expanse?
Tiamat's Wrath, number 8. I think it really just kind of nailed all of my favorite things about The Expanse and put it into one book. So I was happy that one of my favorites ended up being later in the series. It paid off sticking around.
Yeah, that's always really nice to see, especially considering that Leviathan Falls, which is the first book, was very high up in your ranking as well, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Leviathan Wakes, book number
Oh,
1. I
yeah,
really
Leviathan
enjoyed it,
Falls
and
is
it
the
took a
last
while
one.
for another one to surpass it, but 7 tries later, they did it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because normally when you see that, the first book is like really good, and then many of the sequels are below the first book. You're like, okay, well, that's pretty scary. But knowing that that last sort of sub trilogy that you mentioned is widely regarded as being one of the best arcs of the series actually encourages me to continue and read the full thing if I enjoy book 1, if nothing else.
Definitely. Yeah, I would say I'm somewhat of a completionist, but I kind of reserve. I basically I draw a line. I say I'm going to kind of set a high threshold to commit to something, but when I
Okay.
do commit, I'm all in. So I tend to just read book one and then stop, or read the whole series. Very rarely do I tap out like halfway through a series. So I'm kind of in that position right now with Riverworld, if you've heard about that. To Your Scattered Bodies Go by Philip Jose Farmer. I
Oh,
really love
right.
book one, but the reviews for the rest of the books are not that good, and so I'm very torn because I really want to continue, but I know if they find them underwhelming, I'm gonna feel compelled to finish the series anyway.
Right, yeah. And I mean, I think that's actually a rather reasonable policy, all things considered, because you'll have the people who will DNF willy-nilly. Like, if something isn't sparking any form of enjoyment for them at any given moment, they'll just tap out because reasons. And
Yeah.
then you have people like, say, King James over at Mike's server who will read the entire thing and will do it back to back, no breaks. Just
Yeah.
the entire way through. So like you have the
Absolute
sort of
machine.
spectrum. I know it's madness. I think he's on the last book of Realm of the Elderlings, I think, and he's read all 16 of those books here in the past.
I'm
I
impressed.
want to say he started this spring, like in March or something like that. Maybe it was February, but either way, it's been less than half a year. Mad lad. But that's getting out of the discussion. Either way, yeah, Expanse seems rather interesting to me, especially since it's one of those ones that has the sort of TV series to go with it. One that I think a lot of people are aware of because of the TV series. I know personally a few people who only started reading or listening to those books because they enjoyed the show.
Yeah, I haven't tried it yet. I wanted to read the books first, but I feel like I hear mostly positive things about the show. I feel
Same.
like it's been fairly well received by Expanse fans and has made non-book readers become book fans. So it's nice to have that
Yeah, for sure.
in tandem if you end up liking it.
Now all we have to do is hope that Sun Eater will get the same treatment because oh man, does it deserve it. Although it
Oh,
would,
jeez.
admittedly, knowing about it, it would not be the easiest let's say the easiest book series to adapt at all.
No, I would be partial to a Sun Eater video game. I think it would be such
Same.
a fun world to play in.
And
And
you
like,
could really have everything in it. You wouldn't have to make pretty much any substantial cuts uh to accommodate for it because games are just so fluffy anyway in their runtime.
uh-huh. Oh man, just like running around, like fighting people, chopping people down in a Sun Eater type game. That would be, you could put a lot of hours into that, I reckon.
Yeah, chef's kiss. It would be, Mass Effect, but Sun Eater.
hmm
Have Christopher Rocchio write all the separate storylines to make Mass Effect, but Sun Eater. Anyways, that was the third recommendation, wasn't it? The Expanse.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to number
Okay.
4.
My fourth one, I'm going to push you a little bit more towards the harder sci-fi realm, but
Fair
it's a
enough.
standalone, so it's not too big a commitment. I want
Okay,
you to try out Alistair Reynolds with House of Suns.
House of Suns. This is one that you. What is your rating? 9.5 out of 10 for this one.
I haven't done a dedicated review for House of Suns, but I always mentioned it near the top of any kind of decade list or hard sci-fi or space opera. Basically, anything that House of Suns could apply to, could be listed on, is going to be pretty near the top of that list for me. The reason being, House of Suns, we follow a character, Abigail Gentian. She clones herself into what are called shadowlings, 1,000 shadowlings, and they
Uh
spread across
oh.
the universe. They can live for a very long time because they get together for a reunion around every 150,000 years to share what they've learned about the universe. So around 6 million years in the future, this is around their 30th reunion, they get attacked. It's very surprising because this line of shadowlings, the Gentian line as they're known, very powerful. So it's very surprising that someone would attack them. And there's this question, this mystery of who would attack them, why, where do they come from, what do they want? And this story, this kind of cool mystery plays out with insane technology across the universe over not decades, not centuries, not millennia, but millions of years. Just absolute epic scope, hard sci-fi at its absolute best.
Okay. Uh, I had no idea of the premise of this book before because I know I've watched a couple of your videos where you've mentioned it, but I don't immediately recall like the concept, because you do the whole "what is this book about" with everything you mention in every video, which is actually really nice, even though some people who've been around have probably heard the same synopses 15 times for some books. But for new viewers, that's like brilliant format. But this is one that I've seen you praise a lot, and that I feel like Alistair Reynolds is kind of like in that middle space, at least in my awareness, where he's like very well known and highly praised, but also kind of niche in a
Hmm.
weird sense. Because like there's like Tchaikovsky with Children of Time, right? That which is very well known and I hear about all the time. Or you have The Expanse, which is kind of similar, like very popular, but then you have realms of sci-fi that you just don't know about. I feel like Alistair Reynolds stuff in general is just kind of in between. I don't know if that's true though in a more sci-fi sphere.
I think that's fair because I think within a sci-fi community, a lot of people are going to be pretty familiar with Alistair Reynolds, but I don't think he's had any of his standalones or any of his series. Revelation Space is probably the most well-known, really break out into the mainstream the way, say, like a Three Body Problem has, or a Children of Time, or some other more well-known modern sci-fi works. I think because I feel like he's a good author to try and get into if you are interested in some modern sci-fi that leans a little bit harder. He's from that British space opera crew of writers that kind of came up in the last like 20 or 30 years. Because he has a bunch of standalones and Revelation Space, he kind of added to the universe, but there's that kind of like original trilogy. So nothing's I think is too intimidating. Um, Normally, House of Suns, whenever I mention it, people are like, I love it. It seems to be probably his most popular book. But a couple people in my Discord recently have been a little bit underwhelmed. They've kind of shook my confidence, and I need you to build that back up, Casey. I need you to get on Team House of Suns with me.
Interesting. Because it's funny you say that, because I know that you praise it a lot, and I've seen like a couple other people in different Discord servers have good things to say about it, like agreeing with you. But I feel like most of the people that I've seen like talk about it, besides you, and I can't remember if it was King James who read it. It might have been him. I feel
He
like
did, yeah, he did read it.
okay, it was him. I feel like most of the people that I've seen mention it weren't like in love with it. But
Mm.
I don't know if I could provide receipts for that. That might just be me
No
making
friends of
stuff up.
mine, let me tell you what. You know,
Fair
well, a
enough.
couple of criticisms I heard was that it felt like a little bit bloated. This is around 500 pages. I
For a single
found that to be a
book,
bit of an
that's
odd criticism
yeah.
because I didn't think it was necessarily always the fastest pace, but to me it was the ideas. I felt like every 50 page we got a new sci-fi concept that I thought was just really cool, just really blew me away. And so while maybe some of the elements to do with the mystery, some of the character stuff, if that's really what you're focused on, maybe it doesn't move as much as you want it to. But just as like as a sci-fi head that loved diving into those concepts, I thought it was Reynolds at his best.
Okay, that makes sense, and that's fair enough. I feel like with all the different stuff that I've read, I haven't actually really like discovered. I would say like what type of reading would say I prefer, because I've read stuff that is really quick and easy and fast paced and loved it, say like The Martian. I haven't read Project Hail Mary yet. I think Artemis is underrated, so those are a few examples.
Interesting.
Specifically sci-fi, but I'm also say reading Wheel of Time, and the first one of these books, I know it's fantasy, but the first one of these books is widely regarded as being kind of like middle of the road in the series. It's criticized for being very reminiscent of Fellowship of the Ring, which I actually have a lot of beef with that criticism, because there are inspirations, but it's not a ripoff. But generally speaking, there are some readers. I know some readers who would absolutely read Eye of the World and say this is a very slow book,
Hmm.
but I heavily disagree. I've loved every minute of it. And I've also felt like that with certain classics, right? There are certain classics that move quicker than others. There are some that are a lot more boring than others. Um, I would say, like, Frankenstein, for example, could be a very boring book to some people, but I was enthralled, and I know you were too. Um,
Yes, one of my favorites.
yes, it's amazing. I love that book so much. I need to reread it, because I need to make sure it holds up in my mind, because I was still a young reader, even though that was only a year and a half ago, less than that. But like I said, I haven't really discovered what type of reader I am. So moving into sci-fi, I think kind of doing this space opera recommendation works for me because I can get a wide span of it. Because Alistair Reynolds, you say, is uh, a little bit more leaning towards hard sci-fi, but then there are some other books or series that you could possibly recommend that are a little bit softer, that aren't as focused on concepts and ideas. And I want to experience everything in some degree because I just don't know what I do or don't like, or if I dislike anything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go about it because I like trying to read a mix of modern and classic sci-fi, hard and soft sci-fi. And I think over time, I do start to find things that I lean a little bit more towards. But I also think it comes down to execution. Obviously, everybody's reading experience is going to be different. When you mentioned some people might find book one of a series a little slow or derivative, such as like Eye of the World. Some people say that about Sun Eater. A lot of people say
True.
Sun Eater, oh, it really gets good in book two. I love book one. The pacing isn't lightning fast in book one, but I always enjoyed what was going on. So even though I can understand why some people found it slow, I always had a great time reading Empire of Silence. So it'll be interesting to see kind of your different reactions to these and see what you connect with.
That's a fair point as well, because I think in my review for Empire of Silence as well, I said there are lots of very specific, like minute things that you can see are like, okay, this was very clearly taken from Dune, but by the time
Hmm.
you get past the first act, leaving Delos, by the time you get to the rest of the book, it's no longer Dune anymore. But
Hmm.
sure, you can see some of those early scenes and say some of these were inspired by, because like there was that uh dinner conversation scene in Empire of Silence that was like, okay, this was inspired by the dinner scene in Dune, but it was its own take. But I think that Empire of Silence gets unfairly, criticized as being too derivative of Dune, which again I disagree with. It's an
Yeah,
interesting
me
point.
too. I think Rockio just has a lot of love for a lot of different writers. I think you'll find some Hyperion in there, some Ilium, Book of the New Sun. It's not just yeah, there might be one or two noticeable things in book one from June, but he pulls from a lot of things and then also, creates something that is pretty original for I think,
Yeah,
seeing as
for
how many
sure.
people are passionate Sun Eater fans.
I mean, that book right there, and you can actually see it in the frame of the video. That's
Yeah,
my favorite book of all time right there.
there you
So,
go.
but yeah, what is your fifth recommendation?
Okay, so for my fifth and final space opera recommendation, I'd probably recommend putting this one last. If you enjoyed House of Suns, if you enjoyed that little taste of the harder sci-fi, I would
Okay.
say that I would describe that as medium hard sci-fi. This is some proper hard sci-fi, okay?
Okay.
I'm going to recommend to you Ring by Stephen Baxter.
Okay, that was not what I was expecting to hear. And I've only heard you discuss it like once or twice in a couple random videos. So I actually don't know this one off the top of my head.
Yeah, Baxter, I would say, is not that well known. And this book takes that kind of probably Ring and House of Suns are really the only two books that have kind of achieved a scope in terms of scale and time, which has really messed with my understanding of physics and of my place within the universe.
Oh,
And it packs into it this really cool story in which essentially stuff's going on in outer space. We're like, all right, we got to get out of here. We got to go check it out. But the people have to be on this ship for generations and generations and generations. And the split, the ship, they end up forming a split between different camps in the ship, where one side of the ship has essentially built like a rainforest, and they live sort of like a very natural, old-timey type lifestyle. And then one side of the ship has all the futuristic tech. They're like, no, we're going to go about our lives this way. And so we have a
huh.
complete divide. And obviously, things end up happening between them. And then also the question of what is this insane sort of space phenomenon that we're traveling to in the first place? So, really cool story ideas, but it does really break down the science. It's a little info dumpy. A lot of characters will be like, you'll get some exchanges like, hey, do you know about this? And they're like, yeah, I think it's kind of like this. And they're like, not quite. 3-page explanation. So that's not going to work for everyone, but I think if you get on board with the story, you get on board with the ideas, and you just sort of let some of the science wash over you, even if you don't necessarily take it all in, I think it'll be rewarding, because this is one of the most entertaining books I've ever read.
Okay, this was the one that you mentioned takes place over like what, 2 million years or something like that?
I forget the exact number, but it's in the millions.
Okay, I was going to say, I was like, I don't remember this one off the top of my head, but then when you said like this scope of it, and I was like, oh, this is the one that takes place over millions of years, isn't it? That was one of the few things that I remembered about that particular segment. So that sounds interesting enough, but I mean, like, if I'm gonna experience hard sci-fi, I might as well ease myself into it. Even though I like
This I
Crichton, but Crichton's different.
Yes, yeah. Crichton will give you a little taste of that kind of breaking down the science and incorporating the science into the story. I should give the disclaimer: this is book 4 in a series, but the first 3 books you don't necessarily have to read. I didn't read them. I think it holds up as a standalone. 1 and 3 I think are pretty unrelated. They're just kind of in the universe. Book 2 sets up one of the characters in book 4, so you could read that one first, or just jump straight to book 4. I think it's a self-contained story that blew me away. But I just want to give that disclaimer for the completionists, the publication order only folks out there.
The bald booktubers amongst us.
Yeah, shout out Scott.
Okay, so that sounds very interesting, and
Charlie's
that
excited about that one.
yeah, I was not at all expecting for that recommendation to come up when you said we're going into hard sci-fi and all of this build up. I was thinking he's going to say 3-body problem for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Because I know I had commented on your video on that.
Charlie's trying to contribute. She's like, she's a fan of the 3-body problem. She thinks I should have recommended it. No, that's a great recommendation. It's not really space opera. You could maybe include it in space opera, but it is one of my favorite series, so definitely give it a try. But yeah, I thought I kind of stick to the space opera lane just to kind of get your sci-fi journey going, and then you can start to branch out into some of the other different subgenres depending on what you're interested in.
That makes sense, and I appreciate the recommendations. Hey, thanks for getting to the end of the discussion, and therefore the end of this video. If you did, I greatly appreciate it. It means the world to me if you did watch all the way through. If you have any more potential sci-fi recommendations for me that Jonathan and I did not talk about over the course of this video, or that he didn't recommend to me, or that I didn't already express some form of interest in, go ahead and leave that in the comments below. I'd greatly appreciate it. Maybe someday I'll be able to get to some of those things and then eventually be able to review them someday. So thank you guys again for watching this discussion. I'm sure I had a great time with him. I'm recording this outro before I actually did the discussion with him, so I'm sure I had a great time with him. He's a great guy. But thank you guys for watching. I'll be back next week with a fantasy review, so something completely different than what this video is going to be. But thank you guys for watching again. If you did, I'll be back in the next video.